There is a silence, not born of weakness, but of total command. A silence that does not tremble, that does not flinch, that does not ask for space because it is the space. A man walks into the room and the air bends around him. No words, no need. Because real presence doesn't introduce itself. He doesn't speak much, not because he lacks something to say, but because he's already heard it all. The lies, the noise, the endless self-promotion. He's not here to echo what others regurgitate. He's not here to compete for attention. He is attention, embodied. This man has seen the world for what it is, a circus of masks, voices scrambling over each other to be heard, to be seen, to be validated. But him, he doesn't need the noise. He knows who he is. And knowing is louder than speaking, because this kind of knowing is not found in books, nor given through applause. It is earned through pain, through solitude, through 1,000 deaths of the false self. Through every moment, he resisted the temptation to prove himself to people who weren't even listening. He doesn't speak much, because he listens. And when you listen long enough past the words, past the tone, into the soul, you realize how few people are truly there. Presence is rare. It is not charisma. It is not performance. It is not confidence laced in arrogance. It is something deeper, more dangerous, more divine. The man who lives in presence is a mirror. He does not project, he reflects. He reflects your lies, your fears, your unspoken truths, and that's why many can't stand him. Because to be in his presence is to stand before your own nakedness. He doesn't seek to dominate, but his stillness subdues. He doesn't boast strength, but his energy commands submission. Not because he threatens, but because he doesn't need to. He has nothing to prove, and that is terrifying. The loudest man in the room is almost always the weakest. The one who interrupts, brags, debates, peacock. She's not powerful. He's performing. Power doesn't shout. It whispers. It vibrates. It pulses through the man who walks with the quiet thunder of self-mastery. And this kind of man isn't born. He's forged. Forged in the furnace of long, brutal solitude. Not loneliness, but solitude. The sacred kind. The kind where you face the abyss within and don't turn away. The kind where you confront the ego, strip it down, dismantle it layer by layer until there's nothing left but raw, unedited being. He doesn't speak much because he's moved beyond the need to explain himself. He doesn't rush to fill the silence because silence is his weapon. He doesn't flinch in confrontation because he's already confronted the darkest parts of himself. And when you've faced your own demons, no one else's can scare you. Nietzsche said, "He who fights with monsters should be careful lest he thereby become a monster." But this man, he fought his monsters. He didn't become them. He integrated them. He made peace with his shadow not by denying it, but by disciplining it. Because presence doesn't come from suppressing darkness. It comes from owning it. Owning your rage, owning your lust, owning your pain, and transmuting them through fire, through focus into stillness so powerful, even chaos sits down in its presence. This man doesn't live for applause. He lives for alignment. His life is not dictated by impulse, but by intention. He moves with clarity, speaks with precision, acts with purpose. And where most men dissipate energy trying to be seen, he concentrates his energy like a blade, silent, sharp, and always ready. He doesn't speak much because he understands that the most valuable truths are felt, not spoken. And he's not interested in convincing. He's not interested in being understood. His presence is the understanding. You feel it when he enters. You feel it when he leaves. You feel it long after he's gone, like a frequency your nervous system won't forget. And when you ask him how he became this way, he won't give you a formula. He won't hand you steps, because presence isn't taught. It's remembered. It's what remains after you burn away everything false. He doesn't chase. He doesn't beg. He doesn't plead for anything, because what's meant for him feels the gravity of his presence and comes uninvited. He doesn't speak much, because he embodies the sacred. And the sacred is never loud. It's just undeniable. Undeniable, like the mountain that doesn't move for storms, but reshapes them. Like the ocean that does not rise for anyone, but drowns everything shallow. Like the flame that does not scream as it burns, but consumes everything impure in silence. This is what he has become. And not because the world shaped him, but because he refused to be shaped by it. Every attempt to mold him, to shame him, to shrink him, he met with stillness, not resistance, because even resistance is a form of attachment. But presence transcends it. He learned the discipline of not reacting. He watched others crumble under words, under looks, under the need to be right, and he chose instead the path of still fire, the flame that does not flicker, the heat that radiates, steady, calm, unrelenting. He doesn't speak much, because he has mastered the economy of energy. Every word, every breath, every glance sights, deliberate. It's earned. It's rooted. The weak man fills silence with stories. The strong man fills silence with truth. Not spoken truth, but embodied truth. The kind that sits in your gut when he looks at you. The kind that makes you question everything you ever thought power looked like. And it didn't come from ambition. It didn't come from goals. It came from excavation. He went deep into the broken memories, into the grief no one else saw, into the years of invisibility, where he screamed inside but smiled outside, into the moments where his soul bled in silence and nobody came. He stayed there. While others ran to distraction, to dopamine, to deception, he stayed. And in that staying, something ancient awakened, something not taught in schools, something not touched by language. The archetype, the warrior, the sage, the king, the mystic, the father, the flame bearer. Not a character, but an essence. An essence that cannot be faked, that cannot be worn like fashion, that cannot be performed like status. It can only be earned through pain, through presence, through purity. This man is dangerous, not because he harms, but because he reminds. He reminds you of what you forgot, of what you buried, of what you once were before fear taught you to speak too much, prove too much, ask too little of yourself. And you feel it, don't you? In his silence, your own noise rises. In his stillness, your own restlessness screams. In his presence, your own absence is exposed. He doesn't say it, but you know. He sees you, not the version you perform, but the one underneath. The fractured, frantic, frightened self you try to hide behind intelligence, charm, or aggression. He sees it, and yet he does not flinch. He does not judge. He simply holds it in that sacred silence and invites you to meet it too. He doesn't speak much, because presence is permission. Permission to stop running. Permission to stop pretending. Permission to return to yourself. And the reason his presence shakes the room isn't because it's forceful, it's because it's true. And in a world drowning in illusion, truth doesn't need volume. It only needs to be. And when something simply is without apology, without effort, without theatrics, it becomes the most commanding force in the room. That is what makes him unforgettable. Not his words, but the weight behind his silence. Because real presence isn't loud, it's felt. It vibrates through posture, through the steadiness of his gaze, through the way he stands like a man who needs no justification for his existence. This man does not rush. He does not explain. He does not scatter himself across 1,000 conversations just to feel significant. His worth is not outsourced. His value is not negotiable. His soul does not bargain. You'll never hear him argue to be understood. He doesn't need to be, because his clarity is not dependent on your comprehension. This is the quiet power of the man who no longer lives in reaction. He lives in alignment, and that alignment radiates through everything he touches. Even his silence is strategic. He knows the power of restraint, of not responding to provocation, of letting others reveal themselves while he observes. He doesn't fight for the last word because he's already won the only war that matters, the war within. This is what Carl Jung called the path to individuation, the becoming of the self, not the personality, not the role, but the eternal core that existed before your name, your past, your scars. Most men will never walk this path because it requires the courage to be alone, not temporarily, not romantically, existentially, to confront the void and not distract yourself with noise, to feel the full weight of your unlived life and not flinch, to sit with the question of who you are without your achievements, without your failures, without your stories, and not run. He doesn't speak much because he's lived through this death, the death of performance, the death of persona, the death of the mask. And in that death, something wild, something ancient, something sovereign was born. The man who doesn't need the world to understand him, to remain unmoved by it. The man who walks into a room and redefines the frequency without ever opening his mouth. The man who knows that stillness is not emptiness, but presence at its most distilled. He doesn't speak much because he doesn't need your attention. He commands your respect, not through intimidation, but through resonance. Because when a man speaks from presence, every syllable lands with weight. There is no filler, no fluff, no fumbling for approval. Just truth, bare and surgical, landing like thunder, wrapped in calm. And when he does speak, you listen, because you know it's not performance, it's prophecy. Born not of arrogance, but of excavation. Born not of desperation, but of devotion. Devotion to the inner work, to the stillness, to the silence, to the sacred vow that he will never again betray himself just to be liked. He doesn't speak much because he is busy becoming, not becoming someone, becoming no one. Free from the masks, free from the noise, free from the narrative. Just a man walking the earth with fire in his belly, vision in his bones, and silence that speaks louder than words ever could. And that silence is not passive. It is not empty. It is not the silence of absence. It is the silence of fullness. It is the silence of a man who has nothing left to chase. Not because he has it all, but because he finally understands what's worth having. And that list is short. Self-respect, inner peace, purpose forged in fire. He doesn't fill his days trying to be heard. He fills them creating something that needs no advertisement. He is the message. His life, his movements, his gaze, they speak for him. Not because he is aloof, not because he is above you, but because he is within himself, fully, finally, unshakably. And in a world of hollow noise, this kind of presence is radical. It threatens systems. It exposes illusion. It disrupts every room he enters not by noise, but by truth. He doesn't beg to be seen. He sees you in your deflection, in your pride, in your need to dominate, to impress, to win. And yet, he doesn't use what he sees to shame you. He simply holds it because he knows the only real transformation begins in the presence of someone who is already free. And make no mistake, this freedom is costly. It's not won in books or courses or performances. It is earned in silence, over time, through trials, that most men avoid. He has walked through betrayal without closing. He has lost everything without breaking. He has tasted power and rejected its poison. And now he stands not loud, not proud, but anchored, unshakable, not because life can't touch him, but because it no longer defines him. He's seen the game. He's seen the players. He's seen the price of selling your soul to win at rules you never wrote. And he walked away from the spotlight, from the chase, from the applause of those too empty to see him clearly. Because once you've tasted real presence, once you've stood in the full fire of your own soul, nothing else is worth playing for. He doesn't speak much, because words are too small to carry what he's become. What he is now is signal, a signal to other men, a quiet call that says, you don't have to shout to be powerful. You don't have to perform to be worthy. You don't have to prove to be real. Just become the man who no longer needs the room, and watch how the room shifts. Become the man whose presence speaks for him, and watch how the world listens. Because when the world begins to listen not to your voice, but to your being, you have crossed the threshold, not into fame, not into dominance, but into reverence. And reverence cannot be bought. It cannot be faked. It is not awarded. It is recognized by those who've suffered, by those who've searched, by those who've lost themselves in the pursuit of everything and finally realized they traded gold for glitter. They see him and remember. They remember what it feels like to be still and yet unyielding, to be silent and yet the loudest energy in the room, to move slowly but always with purpose. Because this man doesn't just walk, moves the ground beneath him, not through force, but through frequency. His life is tuned, his energy clean, his gaze sharp. He doesn't guess who he is. He knows. And when you know who you are, the world can no longer deceive you. Its offers lose their shine. Its temptations lose their pull. Its praise loses its grip. Because what can the world offer a man who already walks with peace? What threat can touch a man who has nothing left to prove? What lie can manipulate a man who sees through everything? He is free because he chose truth over comfort, discipline over validation, depth over distraction. And in doing so, he unlocked the most dangerous thing any man can possess: authentic power. Not power over others, but power over self. He doesn't speak much because he said everything he needed to say in the way he lives. You see it in his calm when others panic. You see it in his stillness when others strive. You see it in his gaze steady, unflinching, unafraid, like a man who has already buried his ego and has no ghosts left to haunt him. This is what real leadership looks like. Not the loudest voice, not the most followers, but the clearest signal, the one who doesn't guide by instruction, but by embodiment. He doesn't speak much because he's busy listening to what most men can't hear: the voice of his own soul, the rhythm of truth, the ancient drumbeat beneath every real thing. And if you ever find yourself in his presence, you won't remember his words. You'll remember the feeling of being seen without being judged, the feeling of being called up without a single command, the feeling of being in the presence of a man who doesn't speak to your ears, but to your essence. And in that moment, something deep inside you will stir, something sacred, something real. And without a word spoken, you'll know. It's time to become one too, because there comes a momentous silent, seismic moment where your soul stops asking for permission and starts remembering. Remembering what you were before the noise, before the performance, before the endless chase to be something you never needed to be. You remember the quiet strength of your father's gaze before the world broke him. The calm weight of your grandfather's footsteps when he didn't say much, but somehow carried nations in the way he stood. You remember that somewhere inside you there is a man who doesn't beg for approval, doesn't flinch in the face of judgment, doesn't tremble when stripped of title, status, or praise. A man whose silence does not signal absence but arrival. He doesn't speak much because he speaks without sound. Every act of restraint, every boundary he doesn't explain. Every time he chooses solitude over distraction, principle over pressure, peace over applause, that is his voice. And those who can hear it are never the same again, because presence reprograms, not instantly, not dramatically, but subtly, powerfully, like water shaping stone. To be in his orbit is to be invited into your own. To witness a man who no longer reacts, no longer dances for crumbs of recognition, no longer fractures himself to be palatable. And in that witnessing, you feel the fracture within yourself. The places you still shrink, the places you still seek, the parts of you still addicted to being seen before you've even met yourself. He doesn't speak much, but his presence confronts you, not as an enemy, but as a mirror. A mirror that dares to reflect your own forgotten greatness, the unspoken power lying dormant beneath all the fear, all the noise, all the pretending. And if you're ready, really ready, you will rise. Not suddenly, not loudly, but quietly. You'll start walking slower, seeing clearer, speaking only when your words match your weight. You start burning what's false now out of rage, but out of reverence. You'll start showing up not for applause, but for alignment. And the world won't understand. They'll ask why you don't argue like you used to, why you don't explain yourself, why you're not as loud, as agreeable, as visible. Let them ask. Because you'll know you found something deeper than noise. You found the pulse of truth beating under the surface of all things. You found your center. And from that center, you won't need to raise your voice. Your presence will say it all. So when they ask why you don't speak much anymore, why you've gone quiet while the rest of the world screams for attention, let them ask. Let them misunderstand you. Let them mislabel your silence as distance, your calm as coldness, your solitude as arrogance. Because what they cannot hear, they will never comprehend. And what they cannot comprehend, they will fear. But you will not fear, because you've remembered that real power does not perform, it presents S. That real strength does not seek the stage, it commands the ground. You remembered what the world forgot, that silence is sacred, that stillness is strength, and that a man who knows who he is never needs to announce it. He simply walks through the world like a mountain among dust, unafraid, undistracted, undeniable. So let them speak. Let them chase, let them clamor, let them burn their energy trying to be heard. You will remain anchored, aware, unshakably here, because the man who doesn't speak much has already said what needed to be said, in how he lives, in how he breathes, in how he shows up with nothing to prove and everything to embody. And in that embodiment lies the final truth. You don't need to raise your voice when your soul is already speaking.